Hi, I'm Fabian Nicieza, and you are listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Well, greetings, Cap fans. Welcome to episode 217 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. Hey, it's your host, Rick Verbanis, and I'm joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there. That is Mr. Bob Lucius. Oh, Bob, I'm going to get me an old hound dog. I'm going to let him lead the way. Then I'm going to turn him loose. We'll go hunting every day. That's the kind of life for me. There's one thing I want to be, and that's a hound dog man.
I don't know. I don't. I'm drawing a big old fat blank on that one.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's a song called Hound Dog Man, and it was made famous by one particular musical artist by the name of Fabian.
Ah, Fabian. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, back
Do you
in the
remember
day.
remember Fabian?
Well, I do remember the name and probably heard some songs by him. Wasn't he a heartthrob in the day?
He was. He was
Mhm.
a heartthrob in the 50s and 60s. He did a lot of movies and some
Yeah.
TV show appearances and
Mhm.
things like that. He had a bunch of songs. One of them, Tiger, was a big hit for him. But
Yeah.
this one I
Huh.
think was on his greatest hits.
Wow. All right. Tiger, Hound Dog, Fabian. Nice.
Yeah.
That
And
makes
why am I
sense.
greeting you with a Fabian lyric, Bob?
Well, we have a guest on by that name this evening.
We're having on the show today a very established long term writer, 4 decades actually, Fabian Nicieza. And very excited to have him on the show today.
I know, yeah. I mean, we have been talking about this, and I've been like digging into. It's been a while since I've read The Adventures of Captain America, but I'm glad I pulled it back out to reread it for this interview. And I've got a few questions for Fabian.
Oh, yeah? Wait a minute. Do any of them have to do with Cynthia
Oh,
Glass?
you know it will.
Uh,
You know that's my little softball, my little touchstone.
all right.
Cynthia.
So you've been holding on that
I have.
Cynthia Glass is his first true love.
Yep. Been
And
holding on to it.
I don't I disagree.
Steve's own
Because
words. I mean, what more? What more do you need?
whose own words?
Steve's own
Well,
words.
I'd rather hear it from Fabian's own words. We're gonna see, right? We're gonna figure out today, once and for all,
All right.
if this is in continuity or not in continuity. Because
Fair
if it's
enough.
in continuity, then my argument will be, well, it's just puppy love. I don't know if
I
it's
I'd
true
rather
love.
I'd rather it be in continuity than incontinent. So
Well,
any day,
yeah, we're
twice
getting
on
up there,
Sunday.
and we're getting up there in age. Speaking of age, we've got a couple of birthdays, Bob, that are being celebrated this week. So if you are listening to this show when it comes out, which is December 4th, there's a couple birthdays this week. So we have Paul Jenkins. His birthday is December 6th. And we had a lovely conversation with Paul back on episode 173, where he came on and talked about his various one shots, right, of
Mm-hmm.
Captain America stories, which were the theater of war. So that
Indeed.
was a great conversation.
Oh, I thought I spoke out loud, but I guess I was just nodding my head vigorously and mouthing the words.
Also, a birthday this week is Eric Larson. His
Mm,
birthday is December 8th. And also another guest on the show. We had him
yep.
back, wow, 100 episodes ago, Bob, with episode 117. And we had Eric on. Now, Eric, you might go, well, what does he have to do with Captain America? Well,
Mm-hmm.
he did a really cool Captain America one shot called The End.
The end. Yeah.
Yeah, and he had it was a great conversation with him. He's a big Jack Kirby fan.
Yeah. That's right. He had some original art, as I recall.
Not just some. I mean, he had a lot
Yeah.
of original art for Jack Kirby stuff. So it was a cool conversation with him. Um, so those are some of the birthdays going on this week. Anything going on with you?
My son's birthday is December 7th, so the big 1-5.
Oh,
So it's gotta do something for that, I guess. So yeah. Yeah, and then
uh,
we're gearing up to go on a family Christmas cruise in another week or so. So
where at?
Caribbean someplace or other. I don't know. I
Yeah,
just go where I'm told.
is it the Caribbean or the Caribbean?
Yeah, well, I think this time we're going to the Caribbean. Last time we went to the Caribbean. So
Oh, you
yeah,
gotta change it up.
yeah, I like to switch it up. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's cool. Yeah, we don't have a whole lot of holiday plans. Although, you know what we need to do, Bob? We need to figure out when we're gonna do. Gosh, it's coming up. I maybe in just a couple episodes. We're gonna have to do our annual anniversary episode,
yeah.
right? Because this will be what our fourth anniversary. I want to say 4 year anniversary.
Yeah. What is
Yeah.
kind of paper? Is it paper? Paper, plastic? What is it? I don't.
I don't know. I already and then we also exchanged gifts. I
Yeah.
already got your gift.
Wow, you are getting ahead of the curve. Good for
I
you.
did. I've had it. I've had it ordered for quite some time, but I've had it in hand for a couple of weeks now.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
Pressure's on.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. We'll see how that goes. So we'll have to come. Yeah, we have to figure out a theme for
Yeah.
the anniversary show.
Huh.
You know what, Bob? I want to do. You know what? I want to do a top 10 list. Um, maybe we can do it soon. But way back 4 years ago, we did episode 9. We did the top 10 Captain America villains, not named the Red Skull.
That's right.
I want to do a top 10 villains named the Red Skull. No, I'm kidding. I
Yeah.
do want to do a top 10 villains, but before, one of the caveats was it had to be a singular person, not a group. I want to do top 10 Captain America villain groups.
Ooh, interesting.
What do you think
That
about that?
that snake one's not going to be at the top of the list for me.
Oh, I don't know, man. Serpent Society. We got Serpent Society. We got
Yeah.
Hydra. We got
Sure.
AIM.
Well, we got the Exiles.
Yeah,
Those are a wacky group. Yeah.
right.
Right.
What do you think? You think we could make a list out of that?
That could be fun. Yeah, that could be fun.
All right.
Interesting to do.
Yeah, let's
Yeah, we could
consider
see.
that. Maybe we'll throw it out there in the Facebook group and get some votes.
Yeah. Hmm.
Oh,
See if folks can come up with some obscure ones.
that would be good.
Yeah.
All right, Bob. You know what? Let's get Fabian out of the green room and bring him on the show. What do you think?
Yeah, I think he's itching to get out here. So
Our guest today is comic book writer and editor spanning 4 decades, who is best known for his work on Marvel titles such as X-Men, X-Force, New Warriors, Cable, Deadpool, and Thunderbolts, all of which he helped create numerous characters, perhaps none more famous than the Merc with the Mouth, Deadpool. Cap fans may know him best as the 1990s writer for the Adventures of Captain America miniseries, the Nomad mini and ongoing series, as well as a U.S. Agent 4-part story in Avengers Spotlight. We're excited to have Fabian Nicieza join us today. Fabian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so before we get into your current comic work and questions from our listeners, maybe you could talk a little bit about what got you interested in comics as a kid.
Uh, Immigrated to the U.S. when I was 4.5 from Argentina, and my older brother, who's 3 years older than me, noticed comic books on the newsstand rack on the corner, and we're talking about like original New York City newsstand racks, literally on the corner the corner, and he recognized Batman and Superman, which were on TV in Argentina before we left, but it was the 1950s Superman show and the 1940s Batman serials. that were being broadcast in Spanish translation. And I was really young. I barely remember any of that, but I do know that he asked our parents if we could get a couple comics. And at first it was Batman and Superman because that's what he recognized. And we really liked it. We really liked them. So we kept getting comics because it wasn't that expensive. We didn't have a lot of money when we came here. They were 12 cents back then. So woohoo. The, and inflation's hit the comic book industry, hasn't it?
Oh yeah.
And after we started school, which I barely remember, I barely remember first grade, because I was learning the language and my brain was flipping from Spanish to English. So it's all that whole time period. The first year I was here was really foggy. But a friend of my brother's at school simply said to him, "You don't want to be reading those. You want to be reading these cool ones." And the cool ones were Marvel Comics. So my brother, desperately wanting to make sure that we assimilated to the good old fashioned American way, bought like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, and then that was it. Like then both of us were just hooked from that point on. So sometime in the middle of 1967 is when we first started getting all of the things we got, like, and Spider-Man and Fantastic Four on a regular basis. I started getting Avengers in like 68.
So I read that your consistent monthly comic in your youth was always the Avengers.
Yeah,
And simply
yeah.
because you couldn't afford to buy all the other titles on your allowance, so you logically bought the one with the most heroes in it.
Yes, but basically that's just about it. It might have been Fantastic Four if Jack Kirby had stuck with it and not left. But I got Avengers because I liked the idea of more heroes in my book, and then I just really liked it. I liked the book, and we got lots of sporadic stuff. I would pick up lots of things based on what I saw interested me. So and a lot of it was out of the blue. My brother would be like, "What the heck are you getting that for?" Like, I really, really fell in love with Dave Cockrum's art when he was doing Legion backups in Superboy, and started getting Legion in the very early '70s when Cockrum was doing it before Mike Grell took over the book. Um, I noticed Barry Windsor Smith's art on early Conan issues, and something about it really appealed to me. So I started getting Conan with like issue 14 or so. And my brother was like, "What the hell are you getting Conan?" And I was like, "It's pretty cool. It looks cool. I like it." So I always measured anything my brother questioned that I bought. I knew had to be probably good comics. That he tended to buy thinking they were going to be worth something, and I tended to buy thinking that I really liked that art or I really liked that writer. So even at a young age, 10, 9, 10, 11, I was following a lot of it based on who was doing it. You know, Jim Starlin on Captain Marvel, who I then followed to Warlock, Steve Englehart on Avengers, who I followed to Detective Comics with Marshall Rogers in the late '70s, stuff like that. So I always tried to buy based on what interested me and what looked good, but Avengers was always the monthly fix. And frankly, it had some down times too, for sure, as a monthly book, but it was always my regular fix from the late issue '80s roughly onwards.
How did you break into writing and editing comics?
I got a job at Marvel.
That was easy.
Simple as that, Bob. I got a job at Marvel. I out of college, I interviewed at Marvel in DC, and I went through a couple rounds of interviews at both places for jobs in the sales department, the direct sales departments. And I didn't get either job because they were looking for slightly more experience than I had. But I felt encouraged that I at least went through multiple interviews, two interviews at DC and three at Marvel. But I ended up getting a job at Berkeley Publishing, and which is paperback book publisher. And as often happens in publishing in New York City, it's a very incestuous business. You bounce back and forth between companies when you're on the lower end of the pay scale because it's the only way to make more money. And someone I played softball with on the company softball team said that his coworker, my coworker's sister works at Marvel. She's looking to hire an assistant. And I was like, really? And I didn't know his coworker because it was Putnam Berkeley. Putnam was the hardcover house. Berkeley was the paperback house, and I worked for Berkeley. So the only people I really knew from Putnam were based on we all played on the same softball team together. So I didn't we the two companies didn't intermingle at the lower management level positions, only at the super upper management level. So I found out that this guy Tom Hyland had a sister at Marvel named Lorraine Hyland, and she was looking to hire an assistant in the manufacturing department for Marvel Books, which I wasn't quite sure what that meant because I was still a regular monthly reader of comics and I didn't know what Marvel Books was. And I quickly found out that it was a licensing deal Marvel had made with Fisher Price to produce a wide range of coloring books, activity books, sticker books, all this kind of stuff. And nobody in the regular Marvel production department had any experience with those kinds of manufacturers, vendors, printers, paper stock. So they created a small little mini department just to handle that license because this was a pet project of the president at Marvel. And I could care less. I just wanted to get my foot in the door. So I interviewed for the job, and she hired me, and I was her assistant for all of 4 months before I stabbed the poor woman in the back and left. Because once I got there, after a couple months, I learned that the guy who was hired instead of me for the promotion job in the sales department was going to be hiring an assistant. And so the guy who got hired in 1983 instead of me ended up hiring me as his assistant in January of 96. I started working at Marvel in August of 85. So after literally by the end of the year, I'd switched departments to the promotion department. And the guy hiring me, Steve, who I'm still friends with to this day, he didn't even know that he was getting a boss hired above him. And they were going to create a small mini, they were going to separate promotions, publicity, and advertising away from direct sales and newsstand sales to create its own mini department because the responsibilities were starting to grow and there was no one in sales who could really handle that. So basically, I joined a brand new department just like that. And after a few months of feeling us out and seeing what our skills were, our boss named me Marvel's advertising manager and named him Marvel's promotion manager. So he was responsible for all conventions, dealing with all the fanzines, all the interviews, requests, all that kind of stuff. I was responsible for advertising Marvel's books. So all the house ads you used to see in the mid to late 80s, all the promo posters in the stores, all the giveaways like the Avengers ID card, all of that stuff was me and that was my job. So I was on the inside. And long story, not a little less long. After a little while, I just started to try to sell stories to the editors and based on my knowledge of them and what they were looking for. And little by little, I started to sell stuff. And I got a monthly book super quick, faster than I should have, because there's a whole lot of editorial calamity going on with the New Universe. So I became the regular writer of Cyforce, a New Universe title, by early '88. And I wrote that until all the New Universe titles ended about a year later. And then I was doing a lot of little pieces, scut work, inventory stories, annual backups before I got New Warriors in late 1989.
That's fortuitous.
It's fortuitous to be working on staff in order to try to sell your writing. They don't do it anymore. Right? They used to back then. They did it back then as a matter of course, and it became a little too incestuous. So instead of better monitoring it, they decided to create blanket rules, which I think are stupid, which is nobody on staff can write freelance. And I disagree with both sides of the extreme. I disagree with way too many internal people getting hired to do work, which was happening by the mid '90s. And I also disagree totally with the idea that nobody on staff can write a book, because there's plenty of us who came up from the inside who turned out to be really solid professionals who created a lot of good stories for people and sold a truckload of comics for Marvel.
Hey, it paid off, right? You wanted to get your foot in the door, and wow.
Yeah, really ultimately, though, the job was the best part of all of it, not the writing aspect of it. For me, the job was great. It was a really good time to be there, really exciting, a lot of opportunity. My job, before I switched over to editorial a few years later, my job got got my fingers in the pie of every department in the company. So I knew everyone and I interacted with everyone and I traveled all over the place. And I started doing all of Marvel's presentations to their distributor meetings and their retailer meetings and their licensing groups. So I got to do a lot. It was really an enjoyable job to have in my late 20s into early 30s.
So, talk about your early 30s. Let's cross over to the Adventures of Captain America miniseries, which came out in 1991. And
Is that
first
when
of
it
all,
came out? Okay. I think we
I,
started it in 1891.
well, let's get into that. So, and first of all, I just want to say that you're talking with fans of the story, right? So Bob and I, and many of our listeners as well. And so I remember when this story came out in 1991, which was a retelling and an expansion of Captain America's origin. And I recall it was seen as a non-canon, kind of out of continuity
Yep.
due to like had some inconsistencies with Captain America's previously established history. And in fact, you said in an interview 20 some years ago, quote, I have no problem with out of continuity revisionist stories. Hell, I happily wrote one myself called The Adventures of Captain America. I will attribute a line to Mark Waid, which I have always loved. They are all imaginary stories. And so that said, over the years, we've seen elements of this story appear in other stories, and which leads one to wonder if it's indeed in Earth 616 continuity. And we finally have you on to ask. So, was the intention to be an out of continuity story or an actual update to canon of Steve Rogers and his origin of Captain America?
Yes and no. Look, at the end of the day, it was it was an impetus that was driven by creative intent, not editorial concept. So all of it started with a very simple request on the part of Tom DeFalco and Mark Gruenwald to me. They said, "How do we get Kevin back?" And that was Kevin Maguire. Kevin had been a Ramita Raider. Everyone saw how incredibly talented he was, and we lost him because we didn't offer him anything quickly enough. And DC offered him a Wild Cards miniseries that Kurt Busiek was writing. So Kurt was hanging around the offices all the time. So he tried to pilfer Kevin. Kevin drew an entire issue of it before DC decided they didn't want to use him on that because they thought he was going to be too good and too big for it, so they offered him Justice League. And Marvel tried to counter by offering him Silver Surfer. And Kevin was my roommate at that time, along with the inker Mark McKenna, and he was my friend. So he asked us what we thought, and all of us said you should probably do Justice League because it's going to be a huge relaunch. And I didn't ever tell Tom and Mark that, but I recommended that he do Justice League as much as I would have liked and preferred for him to stay and do work at Marvel. So he did Justice League, and it was a huge hit. And 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 at about the 1 year mark when he was considering re-signing for a second year, Tom started to lay the foundation for wanting to get him back. So I basically just talked to Kevin as he started. I think as he was starting his second year on Justice League, so issue 13, 14, around then, I started talking to him about what we can do to get him to come over. And the one thing he wanted to do was Captain America in World War II. And it was always assumed we were going to do it together. I think that never was stated outright by Tom or Mark. Kevin and I wanted to work together, and I think it was kind of implicitly understood that if I got him back to Marvel, I'd get to write something that he drew. And Kevin was going to get to co-plot this with me, not just handle, the script handed to him by DeMatteis and Giffen like he had been, which he felt was a little constraining because Giffen was doing the layouts. And as much as Kevin felt that helped him in terms of his time to produce the work, he still felt it was a little stifling because there were things he would have wanted to do different visually. So we basically just went to Tom and Mark and said, we want to do Captain America in World War II. And they said, like, retell the origin. And we go, yeah, but doesn't matter what the origin has been. Because look, you can quibble bits, but his origin's been retold in several different ways within canon. in the
Right.
past, you know?
Hmm.
So that mattered less to us. With the response we gave them is the one they understood. We just said, we want to do Captain America the movie. That's all. And they said, oh, okay, it's Captain America the movie. So we were working on Captain America the movie, and we approached it that way. Self-contained 2 hour movie that was going to have a beginning, middle, and end, introduce all the important elements of the character, introduce all the different little tricks of what he had, what he needed, what he got, why he struggled to find love, why Red Skull hated him, all of that stuff, you know. Um, and that's what we did. And we worked on plotting it and breaking it out while he was still doing Justice League. By that point, he'd moved out uh, from the place he was living with me and Mark, and he got an apartment in Manhattan. So after work, I'd go down to his apartment, which was a really cool basement apartment in the village. And it was really big, but it was a basement, literally, but it was newly redone walls and everything. And he had almost no furniture. So it was like, it looked like you know what it looked like in hindsight in the Batman Begins movie, the bunker that Morgan Freeman and Christian
Oh,
Bale are
wow.
checking
That's
out the
huge. Yeah.
Batmobile. It had that sort of an elongated look to it. We started putting index cards on the wall, and the index cards were scenes. First, what we need to do, the Shield, the love interest, the Bucky, the military, all of these things, and we just put them up on the wall. And then little by little, we started to flesh it out. And then little by little, we started to turn it into scenes and turn it into a flow. So I'd go to his apartment a couple times a week after work, and we'd flesh it out, and then go do it again in a week later. Because we weren't in any kind of a super rush, because nothing was scheduled. The goal was always to try to get it out in time for Cap's anniversary, which we failed to do. But the project was a huge disappointment for me because of everything that happened with Kevin and with the art and everything else. But th- what I still hold very fondly was the process of making it up until it became a scheduled Marvel comic. Once it became a scheduled Marvel comic, things got worse. But until that point, it was really fun and exciting.
I have to say, I didn't know you and Kevin were roommates. This is a really interesting story. So, because one of my all-time favorite artists is Kevin Maguire, and so first of all, thank you for suggesting he go to Justice League because that was just a fantastic run. It was magic. Between him and DeMatteis
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Giffen and
Ultimately, in hindsight, it's interesting because Silver Surfer would have been a much easier book for him to produce, and he could have done a much better job of producing that monthly. I just never thought that Silver Surfer as a character, although we were relaunching him and we had Steve Englehart writing him, I never thought that it would make the kinds of waves in the industry that a relaunch of Justice League might. And this was
right.
before I even knew it was going to be humorous. By the way, this was before Kevin even knew it was going to be humorous because Giffen's original plot and layouts were not humorous in nature at all until DeMatteis started scripting it, and then they found the vibe. But originally, it wasn't being approached that way. But I just thought it was better for him for his career and in the short run, as much as anything. You know, it was a good way for him to make a blast. A big name for himself quickly.
Indeed. I mean, he is the master of facial expressions,
Yeah,
and so being on a group book, really he was able to do all of that with the facial expressions. So I think that really worked out well.
yeah,
And I've read that he has been the first to comment that he always thought he could have been bigger if he had just been more consistent.
yeah. I mean, he would have. He would have been. He would have been bigger, and he would have been a mainstay. He would have gotten on books that sold a lot more and had much better royalties, if he'd been able to produce the work more consistently. But he never could. He never did. We're still friends to this day. I mean, just had dinner together at New York Comic Con a month ago, or lunch. But he just couldn't do it. And Cap was almost the beginning of that problem, because with Justice League, a lot of it he was in Andy's office. Andy made him come into the office to draw in the office so that Andy Helfer, the editor, could make sure he kept drawing. And with Cap, he started to go down the rabbit hole of of perfection. He started to do the thing artists should never do, which is it it can't be good, it has to be great, it can't be great, it has to be perfect. And you're never going to achieve that to your own satisfaction when you start going down that road. And that's why it just bogged down the way it bogged down. By the third issue, he had slowed down so much that he just couldn't get the work out because none of it was good enough for him. He tore up finished pages, which were gorgeous. Just like, what are you doing? It's gorgeous. What are you doing? You don't have to fill in every brick. What are you doing? You don't have to draw every building. You don't have to draw every link in a chainmail. I mean, I guarantee you, subsequent artists in the future are going to be thrilled if you don't draw every link in chain link in the tunic, because they're going to have to do it forever now. And he was the first one who did it, by the way. And so it was very difficult, very frustrating. I always struggle with it because he was my friend, but I was also an employee of Marvel. I was a writer of a book that we were working on together and collaborating on, but I also wanted to get the damn book done and I wanted to get it out. And he'd already blown my advertising budget because I'd already started to spend the money on promoting the project as advertising manager that kept getting delayed. And it was just really annoying. And really difficult. I wish it could have ended up better. I think if he had been able to do all 4 issues, I think it's a project that would have stood the test of time for decades.
Yeah.
As it is, it's a good project, but it's not. It's not Watchmen level. It's not Batman Year One. Miller Mazzucchelli. I think we could have had something that was not quite at that level, but would have been remembered by Cap fans and Avengers fans, and it would have been a go-to for Marvel readers. You got to read, Captain America: Sentinel of Liberty if you want to read a cool Cap origin. You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, we had Joe Rubenstein on, and he talked a little bit about this because he inked the first issue, and he mentioned the same thing that Kevin just this was like his magnum opus, right? Like that he really spent so much time on it, and Joe, couldn't wait around, for things, and then that's when they brought Terry Austin on. But as much as we, and thank you for filling us in on what happened there, because we all saw that, they brought Kevin West in, and then they added Steve Carr, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think too many of us readers, we were disappointed that Kevin left, but the story itself was still great. And I know Bob has some questions that he's always wanted to ask you.
So I love when we have writers on, Fabian, because I love to pull at some of the threads of the things that really interest me. And you've kind of ticked off a few of them that I hope we get a chance to talk about. So you talked about, Cap's love interest, and you talked about Red Skull and Bucky. And there's a lot of things that I think, even though that maybe a lot of folks don't think this was in continuity, we've seen it carried on forward. Like Bucky, for instance, right? I mean, his role in the relationship is the kid who does the things that Cap can't do. We see that sort of continue on, and I don't remember that occurring prior to this, so that was a relatively new thing.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm really interested in is we get to see the origin story of Cap, and we see it in a different way than we've seen it before. We see this beginning as a competition. And we see a number of different characters brought into Project Rebirth. So we've got Harmon Ferments, and we've got Gilmore Hodge and Jack Windmere, who's a black man. And each of these characters have different morphological traits and different skill sets and personalities and backgrounds. And a little bit later in the story, we find out, at least it's sort of teased out for us, that they represent broadly different qualities. And so it's very specifically said that Furman's, he sort of brings intelligence, and Windmere, he brings athleticism. He's the athlete. And Hodge and Rogers are characterized respectively as, and these are quotes from, I think, Jack Fletcher in the story, calamity and courage. And I really like this idea, and it's the first time we've seen it, that this Project Rebirth is trying to find the right person. And they brought these different individuals in to evaluate them all. What was the sort of the kernel that sort of tickled your brain to come out with this sort of idea?
Well, when you break it all down the way you just did, I'm really frustrated with myself that we didn't just figure the military would try to find a candidate that had all of those qualities in one person. That would have simplified things, wouldn't it? Ultimately, it's me and Kevin saying, if we're writing the movie, what would we do? Forget what Joe Simon and Jack Kirby did. Forget what Stan and Jack did. Forget what Englehart did. Forget what Roger Stern and John Byrne did. What would we do? And it made no sense for the United States military to have a project where they were going to try to chemically create a super soldier to fight in World War II that wouldn't cover their bases
Mm-hmm.
across a wider swath of body types, personality types, et cetera, et cetera. Even what we showed probably should have been hinted at more as a microcosm of the larger effort they were making. You know, that these finalists were not even necessarily finalists; they were this focus group. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because look, if the
Yeah.
military is doing something like this, if any organized entity is doing something like this, they're going to do it at a far greater scale and scope. Somewhere there is, I know that they did the story with Isaiah Washington, right, years later, to do the Tuskegee,
Right. Right.
respect to all of it, and I get that. I never read it, but the storyline, but I get why they wanted to do a story of that nature. There also had to be a camp somewhere where they had a group of like killers, mass murderers, and they were going to see if they could experiment on them to set them loose on the Germans. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, this is
Right.
war. This is
Right.
we're not pussyfooting around
Right.
now. This is war. So it just made sense. And we couldn't go as broad as all that because it would really lose the scope and focus off of Steve. So we honed it to just that.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the opportunities to show that he had to work to become Captain America. That's another thing that we talked about. We didn't want to just hand it to him like it was in the comics. He had to earn the opportunity to be that. The guys in the movie, they took a bunch from us, which
They
we were.
did. Yeah.
Kevin and I saw the first movie together, and before the movie starts, he says to me, "I wonder if they're going to use any stuff from our series." And like within the first 30 seconds, he goes, "I guess they are."
Yeah.
And then we're watching together at the end when the credits are scrolling and our names aren't in there, and that was
Right.
we're leaving so disappointed after watching a movie we were so happy with. So one of the things he and I both wished like crazy we could have come up with was Steve diving on the grenade from the
The
movie.
grenade. Yeah.
Diving on the grenade was just such a great bit, so telling of who this man is. A little nuts. He's a little crazy, desperately insecure and needy, right? Because it takes more than just courage to do something like that. So we just wanted to explore it in that capacity. We wanted to say, look, if Jesse Johnson is winning the track meets in the Olympics and he's the fastest man in the world, why wouldn't the military consider Jesse Johnson for the super soldier serum? There's a world of difference, and we discussed this when we were creating it. There's a world of difference between the intention of Project Rebirth and the super soldier serum and Captain America. The original goal was never to create Captain America. That was a byproduct of an accident. The original goal was to create super
Yeah.
soldiers, plural. So
Right.
of course they're going to look at a wide variety of opportunities to do that. It made no sense not to. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not that we were geniuses or anything like that. It's that the previous generations didn't quite think it through smartly enough, or shortcutted it in more than they needed to for the sake of the story and the time period they were doing it in.
Right. Yeah. Well, I definitely think, I think folks who have read this carefully and then, watch the first Avenger, that grenade jump, there's a direct line, I think, for many folks to this first story in the Adventures of Captain America, the first issue. So definitely you influenced that movie.
Yeah,
So
we know. I mean,
yeah.
the art director from the movie did an interview with Comic Book Resources where they're asking him about certain things, and one thing he said is like, "Oh no, the leather jacket was Kevin Maguire in the Adventures of Captain America miniseries. We lifted it straight from that." And
Straight
he
up.
goes, "We lifted a bunch of stuff from that visually, and we knew it. We're well aware of it. It was even the dynamic between Peggy Carter, Steve, and Tommy Lee Jones was taken out
Mhm.
of our book because that had never really been established in Marvel continuity in the regular comics. That kind of a triangle,
Right.
the boss Steve and her. We didn't use Peggy Carter specifically because we knew she was going to be the traitor, and we didn't want to mangle continuity that way. So we created a character for the series because we knew what her end goal was going to be, and we didn't want to do that. In the movies they could make it Peggy Carter because she wasn't going to betray him at the end, et cetera, et cetera, um
Yeah.
I mean, we're watching the movie, and we just felt that whole three-way dynamic was not lifted as in stolen, but influenced by the approach we took to it.
Yeah, I did want to ask you a little bit later about Cynthia Glass, and so that's a little clearer now why you created that character instead of maybe not just Margaret Carter, but even Betty Ross, who was sort of the sidekick love interest during the Golden Age Captain America comics. But you created Cynthia out of whole cloth. And as Rick pointed out earlier about some of these things that have showed up in regular continuity, Cynthia Glass certainly has, and I think it was Steve Rogers, Super Soldier, in that miniseries.
Oh, really?
Cynthia Glass as an LMD shows up, and Steve reminisces about how this was his first love, and
Oh, that's kind of funny. I didn't know that. It's really
yeah.
funny because I was the first to steal from the damn series because I brought Harmon Ferments as an old man into New Warriors. So he was in New Warriors in the fourth issue of the book. And
I didn't know that.
and I just said, oh, well, you know what the heck's this guy turn out to be? If you were one of the most intelligent guys of your generation and you didn't get a chance to be Captain America, what would you feel and how would you grow
Yeah.
decades later? What would you be doing? So I brought him into New Warriors as an older guy who had his own research facility.
Well, I'll have to check that out. But I did want to ask you one more thing. And so Furman's in the story, he gets released from the program because it turns out he has hemophilia, this blood clotting disorder. And Winmere, who is the athlete, gets his knee damaged because he gets hurt defending Rogers from sort of the bully
The
Hodge.
Goose.
Yeah, and as he's wheeled out, as Winmere's wheeled out, Steve sort of says to himself, "Poor Jake, he was going to be the one." And it got me thinking. And I know you said that you hadn't read the 2003 Truth Red, White, and Black series by Morales and Baker, but we learned in that series about Isaiah Bradley and how he was experimented on, as they try to perfect the super soldier serum. But yet, in your story, there's the possibility that the first super soldier and ultimately the first Captain America could have been a black man. Yeah, so was that just happenstance, or was there a little bit of intentionality
No,
behind
totally
it?
intentional. Always. I mean,
Yeah,
everything I've ever written has tried to inject um, just logical, sociological aspects and realities into it, and I know no different than anything else I've done in all the books I've worked on. If there's a smart fit for that kind of commentary, then I think it's commentary worth making, and based on Black history, especially in light of Black history in World War II, and the things that they were not allowed to do, the things that they did do, the lack of recognition they got for the things they did, all of that stuff. I just felt like here's a chance to acknowledge that in a Marvel comic, but I always have been fully aware of the reality of the corporate publishing end of it. I've always been fully aware from the time I started there that the mantra, uh, purposefully stated in a silly way, was still the mantra that we strove for, which is anybody could read this ages 8 to 80, you know, and that was something that it was instilled in us from the very beginnings, the very get-go, from the time you're an assistant editor, the time you're a new writer, the time anything. It was the idea that anybody can be reading this, which means you have a responsibility to make sure that it's something that can be read by anybody. So does that mean you soften yourself a little? Of course it does. I didn't realize how liberating it could be to write Wolverine dialogue R-rated until the movie came out just last summer, because I do these prints at conventions, and one of them, and I write original dialogue in the Deadpool print, and my new print I have is Deadpool versus Wolverine, and now I have Wolverine person up a storm. And having written Wolverine a gajillion times, I'm like, it's so much easier to write him when he can drop F-bombs. um, so anything I wrote back then was always with an understanding of trying to be smart about how you balance that. Yeah, and I try, for as heavy-handed a writer as I can be, as certainly was back then. I tried not to be too heavy-handed with the 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 social or political or religious connotations and aspects of this kind of stuff. I want you, the reader, to think about it a little bit, a little less so than me hitting you with it, So I don't think I forced the issue with Jacqueline Muir. I don't think I pushed it. You know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
we just showed it, and it's something Kevin and I had talked about. It made nothing. We wanted to have a woman in there too, but we realized that wasn't going to work, because a woman literally wouldn't have been like legally drafted
Right.
into that kind of a role. So they wouldn't have done that. Although I still am of the opinion, just like I said, there was a camp where they were just checking out a few serial killers.
Right. Yeah.
There's also a camp where they were checking out a few of the top female athletes and seeing what they got out of them.
Right.
We just couldn't show all of that in the book.
Excellent. Excellent.
So we do have a few questions sent in from our patrons, which we'd like to sprinkle in through the conversation. And so this is going to be the last question about Adventures of Cap. But Tom Boyd, who actually he lives in the UK, he asks, "You dedicated the Adventures of Captain America miniseries to your parents. Did your understanding of the American dream through them influence your writing of Cap?"
Um, Not so much through. Well, my understanding of the American dream uh, is a very jaundiced one. Okay, um, I, I was about 10 years old when my mother pointed at the TV with Nixon talking on it and said in Spanish, "Es un Perón," meaning he's Perón, who was the dictator of Argentina, originally the president of Argentina, who became the dictator, who got ousted by the military, who came back again as a dictator. So at a very young age, growing up in this country in the height, toward the height, and then the depths of the Vietnam War. Okay, going through Watergate and going through Nixon, and having parents who had um, really strong opinions about the idea of people in power wielding that power unfairly, inaccurately, selfishly, et cetera, et cetera. So I grew up. I don't know that I want to call it progressive, but certainly with a bit of an anti-establishment mentality in my household. So I always had that in me, and yet Captain America was one of my favorite characters, always. Not because he represented America, but as has been shown in print countless times by excellent writers and artists, it's because he represented the ideal of what America wants to be. Now, mind you, I don't think it ever has been that. I don't think it ever will be that for sure now. But I think that the character represents the ideal of what it wants to be. And that's how I approach the character, as someone who's understanding of that responsibility, aware of it. I've gotten the right cap in the mainstream Marvel universe plenty of times, which is a different character than the one I wrote in Adventures of Captain America miniseries, just through experience and everything else. Um, but I've always tried to to have the reader understand that the character understands that he doesn't represent America; he represents the ideal of America, and the hope to do things the right way, with the understanding expectation that it doesn't always quite work out. You know,
Mm-hmm.
one of my foundational influences in my entire life was when I was about 8 years old. My 1970, so not even 9 yet. My downstairs neighbor in the apartment complex that I lived in Saraville committed suicide of a drug overdose. He was 17. He was 8. He just turned 18, leaving high school, and he was going to have to go to Vietnam, and he was not a soldier. He was not soldier, mentality, caliber, anything like that. And he killed himself. And I was like 9, and he was the youngest son of a 3-son family, and who did that to avoid the war. And as a 9-year old, you're like, holy crap! Like, it's like a baseball bat to the back of the head. But for me, it was more than just, he was always friendly to us and nice to us, but the age difference, he's the older kid who lived downstairs, who was a bit of a burnout, always hanging out with the drug guys and stuff like that. But he was kind of cool too, like when you were a little kid, you're like, and that influenced me a lot in my mind. Just the understanding that the push and pull, the tugs and struggles that as a society that we inflict on each other, the what power does to people, regular citizenry, like, it's an 18-year-old kid, like, when you really take a step back, you're like, what the hell are you sending an 18-year-old kid to a jungle on the other side of the world to fight? What? Like, to fight a form of government? I don't, like, it starts to boggle the mind a lot, and that's why writing Cap in World War II is kind of, as far as wars go, that's a good one. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not
No one
one.
ever argued against that war. Never.
You
Well,
can't.
I mean,
Yeah,
no
you
one's
can
talking about it,
argue
but
against World War I. You can
yeah.
argue against just about every war, really. But the World War II is like, enough is enough. There's a righteous passion behind it, which is why I think any stories that are told of that war are always much more aspirational, much more hopeful, much more heroic than war movies you see of other wars. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to get Vietnam War movies that are the same as like Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan with that it's because it was a unified cause for a proper and just reason. If you want to give it a big blanket over. So Steve is tempered by the depression. He's tempered by growing up in poverty. He's tempered by his desire for what America could be, but he never grew up in any kind of America that was a paradise. You know what I mean? If we want to make America great again, and no one's been able to tell me what year that was exactly, but let's say, for the sake of argument, it was 1954, right? Steve missed 1954, so he never got a chance to see America being great, I guess, because he was in an iceberg like at the time. So Steve Rogers is a very unique character to me because he persists in the positivity of what it should be, despite the utter understanding that it's not. So that's why I love writing the character when I get a chance to, because I believe in that hope, I believe in that aspiration, but I'm a realist enough to see that it's not, true. It's not our real world.
So let's go to 1954, and let's talk about what you once described as your quote edgiest published work, and that was Nomad. And so for Cap fans, especially from the 80s and 90s, Jack Monroe holds a special place in the heart. And you took what Mark Grunwald was building to and brought him to the next level, which was this gun carrying vigilante. And we see this transformation in a backup story in Captain America Annual 9 in 1990, which was to be continued in the Nomad miniseries 2 months later, and a story you wrote. What was it about Jack that interests you?
Um, I was an original buyer of the Steve Englehart Sal Buscema Cap of the 50s storyline. When it came out, I got it. And I wasn't a monthly Captain America reader, but I gravitated, like I said, towards things that interested me. And I remember that cover just jumping out and really getting me from the very first part of it. It's not even one that I got at part 2 or 3, and I had to jump back and find the other ones, bike riding to every 7-Eleven I could. It really jumped out at me from the get go, and I was like, oh, I want to read this. This is interesting. I knew that there had been Captain America stories in the 50s because I'd read some of the reprints in like Fantasy Masterpieces, and Marvel's producing some reprint books in the early 70s. So I was just curious about it. It interested me, and when they brought him back, um, I thought that was so cool. I think it was the Madison Zach that brought him back.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I thought it was so cool that they brought Jack back, um, because I thought what an incredibly interesting character that is rife with possibilities of to explore society, to explore our country with eyes that are very different than Steve's. You know, younger eyes, terrified eyes, really, like, and having no clue whatsoever who he is or who he should be, as opposed to Steve Rogers, who had a real strong foundation of who he was and who he needed to be from the get go. Another thing like I love about the movie is how quickly and clearly they made you understand who Steve Rogers was. The skinny little kid who had a moral foundation that was unshakable, right? Jack had none of that. Jack grew up lied to. Jack grew up um, fooled by the powers that be, fooled by authority, fooled by the government telling you that there were commies under your bed. Not all that different from every other age we've ever lived in, including our own today. So he was a young character that had no foundation of moral strength, but desperately wanted to find it. And he thought the only way to find it is by discovering America, by really seeing the country through his own eyes as opposed to through other people's interpretations of it to him. You know, so I thought of all of this stuff when they first brought him back, and I wasn't even a writer for Marvel back then. I had sketches of Nomad that I did like in high school and college, trying to get him to where I wanted him to go. So he was a character I had targeted from the get go. Like
Wow. So years and years.
yeah.
And when
When I
you were
started at
sketching
Marvel, he
him,
was on. I had a list of characters that nobody was doing enough with that I thought I could do something with, and he was one of them.
and when you were
I,
sketching him, was it similar to how he ended up in the miniseries?
yeah. The glasses were bigger, uh, and more so the James Fry miniseries. Clark Hawbaker started going nuts. Like the hair was like 5 feet longer than I ever wanted it to be. Stuff like that, you know. But originally, depending on the time frame we're looking at, so like some of the early '80s and late '70s fashions were kind of strange. So the sunglasses were really really big and polarized. There's always polarized lenses in everything I drew, so it was reflecting America back at you. But you can't
Interesting.
do that in a monthly comic because it's really annoying and it exhausts the artist. So we didn't do that nearly enough. Um, but I also wrote I wrote a short Marvel Comics Presents story
Yes.
that got the ball rolling towards the miniseries. That was me
Hmm.
setting up a miniseries that had never been approved yet. It hadn't even been pitched yet. I was just setting it up just in case. And then I got to know Mark better, so we got to become friends, and I got to talk about the character with him and what he had or planned or didn't have planned, and what I would love to do with him. So Mark was really a proponent of exploring this. He didn't have a green light capacity as executive editor. Tom did, but Mark wanted to hear what I had to say about the character. And then the annual backup was done knowing that we were going to have a miniseries the next year. We didn't have an artist yet. I don't think James was the artist yet, or else he probably would have drawn that short story. So we still had to get an artist, but we knew that we had a green light on doing the miniseries. We just had to find an artist first. So it was kind of a plan I had in place, and just sort of milked it patiently until I had the opportunity to do it. And I didn't know if the miniseries would sell well or not. It sold well enough, and it was fortunate that it was a time where Marvel was looking to do 5,000 books a month, so they were greenlighting everything. So once the miniseries did reasonably well, they said, let's do a monthly book." Okay. And Fabe, you want to do a monthly book? I was like, yeah, I want to do a monthly book. Well, I'm already writing a few things, but I don't care for this. I want to do it. But it is still, to this day, it's the only book that I've ever done in my career that I wish I could do over again. I would want to do over. I would do it better. I'm a better writer now, and I would do a better job with it.
It's interesting you should say that, because I know um, you've talked about this before. Marvel had no mature titles in their line at the time when you were writing this.
Yeah.
But you said you tried each and every month to convince editor-in-chief Tom DeFalco that Nomad should be the first mature story. So
Yeah, I wanted a whole line for Marvel that was mature reader line that didn't have a Comics Code seal on it. I was lobbying for that a lot as advertising manager, not the least of which is because I thought that I knew it would sell, but I also thought that it would give us something that other companies were doing that we weren't doing, which is capturing an older non-superhero marketplace. And I thought we needed that, and it's just that Tom's sensibilities and even Mark's sensibilities really really made them struggle with that idea, and so there was internal resistance to the idea. So because there were people who agreed that wanted to do that, there were people who didn't want to do it, and ultimately any opportunity for that got scuttled as a result of scumbag Perlman buying the company and taking it public with the stock. That threw off any opportunity to have a mature reader line, because they thought any controversial story was going to negatively impact their stock price, as I learned personally, very directly, very personally, because it affected a Nomad story that I wanted to do, to the highest reaches of Marvel's hierarchy. In fact, higher than Marvel's hierarchy, because it went out, the conflict went out to Perlman's, McAndrews, and Forb group that got involved. I wanted to make Nomad HIV positive. If you remember the 3-issue storyline I did, so subtly called Hidden in View. And Nomad was going to come out of it finding out he was HIV positive, that he'd gotten HIV from a blood transfusion. And this was the early 90s, so it was still a very controversial disease that had a lot of lies and propaganda being tossed out about it in order to create fear, in order to angle that fear toward the marginalized and the other. So I wanted to make the character that 93, was it 93 or 94? 94 maybe, I don't remember. But everybody internally agreed and said, yes, let's do it. And Bill Bevins, who was Ron Perlman's right-hand man at McAndrews and Forb, said, no, you're not allowed to do that. And we had a big meeting at at Terry Stewart's office, who was the president of Marvel, where Bill Bevins tried to explain to me why Nomad is at the top of the Marvel bell curve, and doing this would really adversely affect the stock price. And I had to, I was like such an ass back then. And I'm in a meeting with Bill Bevins, Terry Stewart, the president of the company, Mike Hobson, the publisher of the company, Tom DeFalco, the editor-in-chief of the company, and me. Not even Glenn Herdling, the editor, because we didn't want him in there, because we didn't want him to get in trouble, right? And I stood up. All of us were sitting down except for Bill Bevins, who had drawn the bell curve on a big like a notepad thing. But we didn't even have erasable markers back then. That's how long ago it was. And I got up, and Tom just looked at me like, oh my God, what's he going to do? I got up and I asked Bill Bevins for the marker, and I take the marker from him and I said, I understand everything you're saying. You're just wrong about one little thing. Nomad is not here at the top of the bell curve. Nomad is, and I go to the bottom of the bell curve where it's actually flattening out, and I go, Nomad's right here. I said, and you want to know how I know this, Bill? Because I write X-Men every month, and X-Men is Marvel's #1 seller, and that's at the top of the bell curve. Nomad sells 40,000 copies a month. It's down here. Everything else in between. So if you're telling me we can't do it with characters like this, then you're telling me we can't do it with any character. And I said, and if you're saying that, then you're saying that the owners of Marvel Comics don't want Marvel Comics to be Marvel Comics. And that's it. I said, and that's it. Just say that. And I sat down. And the meeting ended really quickly after that. Of course, I wasn't going to be allowed to make a Nomad HIV positive. And we left the meeting, and I just turned to Tom and my tops, and I go, you get, the company just lost me. Like right here, the company just lost me. I'm going to be gone. Within a year, I'll be gone. And within a year, I was gone. You know,
Wow.
because they were the owner. That's how the owners were thinking. If Ron Perlman, if scumbag billionaire Ron Perlman had taken Marvel public in 1965, we never would have had Black Panther because it would have been way too controversial and it would have adversely affected the stock if we introduced a black superhero. You know, never would have had any of the things that have happened, you know, in comics in order to try to tell stories that that help us see society and progress how we see society, you know. So, and then a year later, Jim Valentino made Shadowhawk, or did a HIV story in Shadowhawk and got all this publicity for it. I'm like, son of a
Yeah.
I'd already been on Entertainment Tonight for Nomad because we did the LA riots issue, which got me on Entertainment Tonight, and I just wanted Nomad to be a book where every 6 months it got some sort of publicity because it was doing something unexpected, you know.
Uh, okay, so you leave Marvel, you come back, and you're on Thunderbolts, and it's 5.5 years later after the Nomad series ends. Yet here you are, you're bringing Jack Monroe back. You just come on to Thunderbolts, and the first character you bring with you is Jack Monroe, but he's the new Scourge.
Yeah, that's how. I mean, we didn't reveal it was Jack for like a year into my run,
But
so
you knew,
it's not like I did it like in the first month or nothing.
No, but you knew. So what was it
Yeah,
about
yeah,
Jack?
we knew who we wanted
What
it to
was it
be.
about Jack that you kept coming back to?
Well, I think he's a great character, and he was introduced as a villain who wanted to be a hero. So that sure made a lot of sense for Thunderbolts, didn't it? You know,
Mm.
so I just thought thematically the character made a tremendous amount of sense. He was left in an induced coma state, and that would give the government access to him to be able to try to manipulate him. I thought it was really interesting. A character that had been born as a result of government manipulation and fought to escape it was being manipulated again, you know. So I just thought that all of that was interesting stuff for the character, not the least of which is the Captain America Bucky connection to Zemo, which, because Captain America and Bucky aren't in the comic book, I need to find great connections that get me to dig into Zemo, you know. And I thought that Scourge being Jack Monroe helped do that, even though there was no direct connection between Helmet Zemo or, you know, wait, which one was I writing? Helmet is his father, isn't it?
Yeah,
Heinrich Zemo.
you did Helmet. Helmet's the son.
Yeah.
Helmet's the son and
Yeah.
Heinrich is the father,
Yes.
or the other way around. See, now I'm all confused. It's been
Helmet's the
20
son.
years.
Yep.
So there was no direct connection between the two of them really, but there was a thematic connection between them. I love
Well,
issue 39. That monster issue was one of my favorite comics I've ever written. The fight between Scourge and Zemo. Well, I just loved it. I loved writing it. I loved Mark's art in it. I loved all the touches I was doing. It was just one of those that when you're done with it, you're like, yeah, okay, that one worked. They don't always work. That one worked.
well, making Jack Scourge really worked as well. So longtime patron Mark Domiar asks, uh, do you ever look at what other writers do with a character or group you worked on, and think of a way you could undo what they did. For instance, have you thought of a way to bring Jack Monroe back from the dead?
No. Um, no, that was a nail in the coffin for me, actually. The what Brubaker did to Jack was the single thing that made me stop. Caring's not the right word, but stop focusing or worrying. That's not the right word either. Stop. It made me stop being attached to Marvel continuity. So as a writer now, I'll look at a few things that have been done if I'm using characters I've never written before, or to get an idea of what the current status quo might be, because I don't follow anything regularly anymore. I just read digital trades, and oftentimes it's years after they came out. Um, but so I just get an idea of what I have to do to get the feel right for where it is. But I stopped worrying about what's connected to what, who died, who didn't, how do you know what, I could resurrect them in 5 seconds, but I don't want to resurrect them. They don't deserve them. The company doesn't deserve the character as far as I'm concerned. So I'm not going to be the one to do it. That's for sure. You know, um, the nobody would get them right anyway. Certain characters are alchemy. It's the mix of the writer, the artist, the editor, the character, the time, and I think that getting that alchemy to mix properly is a really difficult thing. New Warriors is proof positive of that, for Marvel's efforts over 30 years to relaunch the book. That there's something about the alchemy of that combination in 1990 that made it work. And even those same ingredients won't necessarily create the same potion. Danny could be editing it, and I could be writing it, and Mark or Derek could be drawing it. It won't be the same book because I'm 62 now, not 32, or 30. It's just so it's different. Um, uh, Jack is one that I think, because I had thought about him so much for so long, because he was so reflective of the questions I had about our world, back then. I don't know that anybody could duplicate it. Um, but those kinds of stories can be told and should be told. It doesn't necessarily have to be with Jack Monroe. Um, they got 500 Captain America clones running around at this point, don't they? It could be any one of them. You know, didn't they do a book where they introduced like 700 Captain Americas all over the country? I mean, they could, any one of those could be Nomad, or a Nomad analogy, you know.
Mm.
And it should be a younger writer doing it. It should be somebody who's questioning today's society, today's age. It shouldn't, just like when people ask me all the time, would you write New Warriors again? No, water under the bridge, that ship has sailed. I'm too old to do it now. I might have considered it 15, 20 years ago, but not now. And it should be a younger writer writing it. If they're 22, 23-year-old characters, it should be somebody who's closer to that age. Same thing with Jack Monroe. It should be somebody. My opinions on this country are pretty much formed. they're I'm not questioning it much anymore, the way I was then. You know, um, so I think if I wrote it now, it would be really didactic. It would really be annoying, because it would be a little too. The thing I don't like to do would be hammer on the head, you know, and I'd be striking the hammer really hard. It'd be really bloody because I just feel there's a lot of people whose heads need to be bashed in. So that's what it would be.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit. So we do have a question by patron Matthew Glover, and he wants to know: is it different writing for one character versus writing for a whole team of characters?
Yes, very much so. Um, it's really about, especially back then. I don't know about now. The way books are written now is very different than the way we wrote them 30 years ago. We wrote monthly comics with ongoing subplots, 1 part, 2 part, 3 part, 4 part stories. Everything now is written for self-contained stories, with trades in mind. And you could write a big 36 issue magnum opus saga like Hickman has done on Avengers, but he still breaks it down into like 6-issue chunks, you know. And the subplots aren't handled the same way as they used to be. They're almost always self-contained within the unit of story you're telling. They don't carry over as often into the next unit of storytelling. So I can't speak as much to how what the difference is now, because I haven't written that many monthly books for Marvel or DC in a long, long time, and knock on wood, I hope I never have to. So back then, it really was a matter of um, number one, praying you had an artist who was a good storyteller who could move the camera around with a group book, because in a group book you have to move the camera around the page, because in order to create a smoother dialogue flow, you need to flip your angles, and that helps you write dialogue that carries you through a page, because it's not the same positioning of everybody, which creates the same order, which makes it harder to have conversational back and forth. You know, so I was blessed when I get to work with guys like Mark Bagley, you know, who was an excellent storyteller, and understood intrinsically, like John Buscema did, how to just manipulate your camera on a page to literally create a flow for the writer. And doing a solo book is a lot more, the character's focus is a lot more internalized. Everything going on is about that character's point of view. Everything going on is either happening to that one character, or that one character is happening to the story. In a team book, it's far less so. A story can be slanted towards a character. Vance Astrovic wants to stop this guy who is destroying space launches, you know, because Vance believes in space exploration, blah blah blah, and all the other characters are angling their points of view through Vance being the focus on the story, but you're still getting 4 or 5 different perspectives on a story. Whereas with Daredevil, you're getting Daredevil's perspective. With Spider-Man, you're getting Spider-Man's perspective. So from a writing standpoint, I've always found team books to be tremendously easier to write, because they help me write them. You know what I mean? Just the character interaction, the variety of backstories the characters have, the variety of history they have allows you to mine that for story possibilities. So as far as I'm concerned, when I wrote Nomad, I had a story to tell. Nomad does blank, right? When I'm writing New Warriors, I got Namorita's Atlantean backstory. Oh, I could write an Atlantean story. Oh, I got Van Sastrovic wanting space stuff. Oh, how do I figure out how he can meet the Inhumans? You know what I mean? Like you get a gajillion different angles, which actually for me personally as a writer made it easier to do. But I haven't written until I just did Free Agents for Image. I hadn't written team books in a while, and I was really rusty and felt it when I started doing this, because it had been quite a while since I'd really written an ongoing team book.
One last question from our listeners. Dave Witham, he's a listener who's a huge John Walker U.S. Agent fan. He's also from the UK. And back in 1990, you wrote a 4-part story in the pages of Avengers Spotlight. And it was called The Xenophobic Man. And he asks, what were Fabian's motivations in writing a story about the, quote, government's pet hero going up against the Border Control Agency in order to help suffering refugees across the border in the U.S.? In 1990, Walker was still generally acting like an ass and a bit of a government toady, so this seemed like quite the departure for him. For context, The Xenophobic Man is a story that I constantly refer to in order to counter-argument that Agent is a racist and always follows orders.
The truth is interesting, because the truth was that it was always a Captain America story I wanted to do. And Mark was never going to allow an inventory story to be published in Captain America as long as he was writing it. So he said, "Why don't you make it a U.S. Agent story, and we could do it in Avengers Spotlight, and solo Avengers originally, actually, when I first started working on the story." And I had wanted it to be a Cap story for a very long time, And I took a step back and I reimagined it as a U.S. agent story, and it worked differently, but it still worked for me, and that was the key. Did it still work for me? Am I still making the using the characters properly for the points I want to make about the story? And Mark's suggestion for it was Mark Reynolds. I'm sorry if I didn't say that before. Mark's suggestion for it was his awareness that it would be an even more complex story for John Walker. It would be far less black and white for him, which made it a much more interesting conflict for the character. Now, I have not looked at that story in 25, 30 years. And I remember at the time being very disappointed with it because I lacked the time I needed to give it the time it deserved. I was doing way too much work. I had a full-time job at Marvel. I was doing a lot of freelance writing. This was one of those that fell into the, well, I always wanted to do it, and it's already greenlit, and we started it, so I got to finish it. But it wasn't never a story that I felt I did as well as I could have or should have. Now I want to reread it just to be mad at myself. Um, so in essence, the realization, the reality is that it wasn't originally a U.S. agent story. That Mark Reynolds suggested that it be one because he thought that it would make a more interesting U.S. agent story than a Cap story, because Cap's answers would have been a little more clear cut. They would have been a little more morally righteous. U.S. agent had to be taken there. And see, now I'm going to reread the story. You gave me no choice. I got to go freaking find it in my basement. Has it ever been reprinted or anything that I might have gotten as one of my comps from
You know
Marvel?
what? It's not even on Marvel Unlimited, so I couldn't even look it up on there. I had to.
No, I got to freaking find my solo Avengers in the basement. Oy vey. Yeah, I haven't looked at that one in a really long time because it was one of those I was just disappointed, and I was at myself more than anything. And Dan Lawless is a really young, new artist, and I don't recall how excited I was when I was getting the pencils at that time. Uh, but in his defense, it probably had nothing to do with his pencils. It had to do with the fact that I was doing 3 or 4 monthly books with a full-time job also at the same time. So I was a little bombarded back then.
So there you go, Dave. Now you know the answer to the question of why it seemed a little out of character for John Walker, and that's because it may have been a little bit more like Steve Rogers.
Yeah.
Uh, all right, so Fabian, let's bring us to present day. What else what's keeping you busy right now? Are there any projects coming up that you can share with the listeners?
Uh, no. I it's not finalized yet, but I will probably be doing a, series of issues for an established character that has been published by different publishers in the past in a genre that I am not known for at all, which is why I'm very excited about it. I just can't say what it is yet because it's not final yet. But we've been percolating and working towards it. They have a draft of my proposal now, and if it happens, it'll be like 12 issues total, probably 3 4 issue miniseries. And it's not a character you ever would have thought for me to write, but I remember being about 13 years old and buying the comic and going, oh, this isn't as good as that. Why isn't this as good as that? It should be so much better. It would be so much cooler if this character blank, 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 blank. So even when I was 12 years old, I was thinking that I was thinking of how I would want to rewrite this character. So I'm getting a bit of an opportunity to do that now, but it's not announceable yet because literally we are just in the early starting process now. And that may be all the comic work I really focus on next year. I've been focusing more on prose. I had 2 novels that came out a couple of years ago, and I'm trying to find the right the right connection for a new book. And that's been a bit of a struggle, but I'm enjoying the process of trying to get to it. And the first book looks like it will be optioned for television again. It already had been optioned for television once, and now it's going to be optioned for television again. But this is a pretty impressive package of people involved with it. So maybe it gets on TV. And if it gets on TV, it's not generational wealth, but it's a good enough contract that I can explore pros without worrying as much whether pros wants to explore me. um, so so that's where I'm at with that. And we've had Free Agents, which is an image book I did with Kurt Busiek and Stephen Mooney. The first arc wraps up with issue 7. Issue 5, I think, is coming out. Issue 5 just came out. Issue
So
6
for listeners who aren't familiar with that series, Free Agents, what can you, how can you explain it and tell us
It is
about
a
it?
group of young interdimensional soldiers who have been fighting an absurdly massive interdimensional war basically since they were born. And all of their planets have either been decimated or been dragged into the war. And as a result of a battle in an interdimensional breach space, they wind up stranded on Earth with no way back. So for the first time in their lives, these young 20 somethings wonder, what do we do if we're not soldiers? What do we do if there's no war to fight? What do we do? There's no war to fight. Then all they've ever done is fight. So they think they have an opportunity to find themselves and find their lives, but very, very soon, as in the end of the first issue, spoiler alert, their commanding officer, who they thought was dead, is back and is on Earth. And he's going to make sure the fight continues, whether there's a fight on Earth or not. So it's the struggle between the two of them as moving forward, as they start finding things on Earth that are part of the breach is spitting stuff out on Earth, and that means that eventually the big bad is going to find his way to Earth. So their commander Barrage wants to prepare them for that. The eventuality of that, whether it's going to happen in a month or 50 years, doesn't make a difference to him. He wants to do it. So it's called Free Agents because they're not free at all. And it's a book that Kurt came to me with and wanted me to co-write it with me, and I always like the opportunity to work with Kurt. And we got Stephen Mooney to draw it. I'm frustrated because the industry being what it is, the sales on the book aren't good, and we didn't do a good enough job. I feel it really starts clicking nicely around issue 4, 5, 6. But issues 1, 2, and 3 just weren't quite there. It was actually really interesting because I've always had this belief that as an editor, I always wanted to hire my creative team and have them do issue 3 before they did issue 1, and and maybe have them do issue 4 before they did it after issue 3, then go back and do issue 1, because the monthly process is teamwork gelling. It's no different than a TV series. Watch any sitcom and realize how much better sitcoms might get as they go along, because the writers start to understand their actors better and their characters better and who works well with who, so they start to write scenes for the strength of the show. Comics is not that different. You start to really get a good grasp of what your artist can do and what characters work with who and what combinations work best. And sometimes that doesn't happen for a few issues, ironically enough. But unfortunately, everyone's impressions are usually made by the first few issues. So I can't wait for issues 4, 5, 6, and 7 to get out there, because I can good stuff. And whether we continue or not, I honestly don't know, because it all depends on the image parameters for the numbers. The industry is so different than anything I'm used to that I don't have a good grasp on what publishers expect or need out of the product they're putting out there in terms of sales numbers, because some of these publishers are telling me how proud they are of XYZ book, and then they tell me what it sells, and it would have been canceled by Marvel in 1989 faster than anybody's head could have spun. So I just don't know I don't know what the future holds in store for it.
Yeah. Nowadays 10,000's a respectable number, right? So
yeah, I know. Yes.
Yeah. Um, and so if listeners want to catch up on when you do have new announcements, what's the best way to follow you?
Uh, I'm on Blue Sky much more so than Twitter now. So you can catch me Fabian Nicieza at Blue Sky Social. Instagram is fnicieza at Instagram. Um, and Facebook is just my name on Facebook. I'm pretty accessible and open on social media. If anybody ever wants to ask a question or anything like that, you can always reach me through my author website, which is just Fabian Nicieza. So good luck spelling it, but if you spell it right, you'll get to my URL. I
We'll
want
put
it to be the
we'll put
most
the links
misspelled
in the
URL on the planet.
we'll put the links in the show notes. So
And
make it easy for
and
people.
I have a contact tab on my author website, which lets you interact with me directly. So I'm pretty accessible on social media. I'm pretty open. If you're not a jerk about it, I'm always interactive with you. You know, if you are a jerk, I just ignore you.
Well,
So if I don't
listen,
respond to you, it's either one of two things. I didn't see it and it got sent to spam, which is what you want to believe, because the only other option is you're a jerk and I'm not responding.
well, we could tell you right now, if they are Captain America fans, they tend not to be jerks.
Agreed. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah,
Most people who are Cap fans tend to get it. They tend to get it, and they tend to get Cap, which is good to know.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Fabian, for coming on the show and wrapping Cap with us. It's been a lot of fun.
It's my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun too.
Well, Bob, that was one heck of a conversation with Fabian. I got to tell you, I had no idea that he and Kevin Maguire were roommates at some point.
Yeah, or that their apartment looked like Lucius's workshop at underneath
Batman,
Wayne Industries.
yeah,
Yeah,
Batman Begins, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, that was a really cool story about how Adventures of Captain America all came about. Number one, and also how it ended.
I fell
And
apart. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So interesting story there. And then, of course, getting into the whole Nomad and yeah, just some cool stuff there.
yeah. There a lot of depth in that conversation. So started off with a question and really dug deep into to a lot of them, which I really appreciate. I appreciate his openness to discussing some of those things and really drilling down into the level of detail that maybe the casual reader doesn't have an opportunity to to hear most of the time. So again, a big score. I think it was great to have him on the show.
Yeah, 100%. Um, all right. So next episode, we're going to get back into our long tail story, which is going to be Secret Empire. And then we're going to be doing part 5, which is Captain America 174, which came out in 1974. And so we'll do a panel by panel review of that issue. And it's getting good. It's getting good. We're getting to some of um, the thick of the plot in
Mm-hmm.
Secret Empire. So looking
Mm.
forward to covering that next episode.
Yep, I'm looking forward to diving back in as well, and spending some time with you, Rick. So always a joy to come on the show, talk about Cap. We all need a little Cap these days, right?
We certainly do. 100%. Couldn't agree more. All right, Bob. Always fun wrapping Cap with you.
It is. See you next week, my friend.
All right. And if you don't mind, please rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen. If you're on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up. And Facebook, give us a comment. Apple, give us a 5-star review. Every bit of that is appreciated. And as always, we thank you for listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
No Deadpool questions. This has been my favorite podcast ever.
I was going to ask you about that. I was like, is this the first time you've never been asked about Deadpool?
No, don't
No,
do it.
we're not. We're not.